Welcome to Midnight Musings Stories, where the past whispers truths we've long forgotten. I'm Eleanor, and tonight I'll take you to a forsaken lighthouse on the cliffs of Greyhaven, Vermont. It's a place where light once guided sailors, home. But now it holds secrets darker than the sea. This is the story of the Lantern Room and the whispers that changed my life forever. 40 years ago, I thought I knew what fear was. I'd felt it as a child, hiding under the covers during thunderstorms. The wind howled like a pack of wolves outside my window. I'd felt it as a young woman walking home alone after a late shift at the library. The shadows of Greyhaven's narrow streets stretched long and menacing behind me. But nothing could have prepared me for the fear I felt in the autumn of 1990. That was the year I first stepped into the lantern room of the old lighthouse on Blackthorn Point. My name is Eleanor. I was 55 that year, a retired librarian who'd spent her life collecting stories. I loved tales of the past, old legends, forgotten diaries, whispered secrets in dusty books. I lived in a small cottage on the edge of Greyhaven, a coastal town in Vermont. The air always smelled of salt and pine. The sound of the waves was my constant companion. My cottage was modest. It had a slanted roof that leaked during heavy rains. A wood stove smoked more than it warmed. I had a garden where I grew lavender and rosemary. My walls were lined with bookshelves. They groaned under the weight of novels, history tomes, and folklore collections. I'd spend my evenings by the fire, a cup of chamomile tea in hand. I'd lose myself in the pages of Jane Austen or Edgar Allan Poe. The crackle of the flames soothed me as I read, but there was one story I couldn't find in any book. It was the story of the lighthouse on Blackthorn Point, a story that had haunted Greyhaven for over a century. The lighthouse had been abandoned since the 1950s. Its once bright beacon was now dark. Its stone walls crumbled under the sea air and time. It stood on a jagged cliff overlooking the Atlantic. Gnarled pines and thorny brambles surrounded it. The townsfolk called it cursed. They said it was haunted by a woman who died there in the 1890s. She wore a white dress. Her voice, they said, was carried on the wind. She whispered to those who dared to listen. I'd heard the rumors since I was a child. My mother used to warn me about the lighthouse. "Stay away from Blackthorn Point, Eleanor," she'd say, her eyes shadowed with fear. I'd nod, promising I'd never go near it, but even then I was fascinated. I'd lie awake at night, imagining the woman in white. What had happened to her? What did she whisper to the wind? As I grew older, I dismissed the stories as small-town folklore. I told myself ghosts were just figments of imagination. They were born from grief, guilt, or loneliness. But I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward the lighthouse. It was a strange, magnetic draw that grew stronger each year. I'd often walk along the cliffs near my cottage. The sea stretched out before me like a sheet of molten silver under the moonlight. From there, I could see the lighthouse in the distance. Its silhouette was stark against the sky. Its lantern room glinted like the eyes of a watchful creature. I'd stand there for hours. The wind tugged at my scarf. My heart beat a little faster as I stared at that lonely tower. I told myself I was just curious. I wanted to document its history for the children at the library's story hour. I loved sharing stories with them. Their eyes would widen as I read tales of knights, dragons, or shipwrecks. But deep down, I knew it was more than curiosity. The lighthouse was calling me. It was begging me to uncover its secrets. On a chilly evening in October 1990, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned a deep indigo, streaked with threads of gold. The air was crisp. The scent of fallen leaves and salt water hung heavy around me. I bundled up in my wool coat. It had frayed cuffs and a missing button. I grabbed my flashlight, a notebook, and a thermos of tea. I slipped a pen into my pocket. Its weight was a small comfort. Then I headed out into the gathering dusk. The path to Blackthorn Point was a mile from my cottage. It was a winding trail that cut through a grove of pines. It skirted the edge of the cliffs. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and roots. They seemed to reach up like skeletal hands, eager to trip me. I kept my flashlight trained on the path. Its beam cut through the darkness. It illuminated patches of moss and spiderwebs between branches. The wind was stronger here, closer to the sea. It carried the mournful cry of gulls circling overhead. I pulled my coat tighter around me, my breath fogged in the cold air. I pressed, en pas. By the time I reached the base of the lighthouse, the last light of day had faded. The world was cloaked in shadow. The tower loomed above me. Its stone walls were weathered, stained with salt. Its windows were dark and empty. The door was ajar. It creaked on its rusted hinges as the wind pushed against it. The groan sounded almost human. I hesitated. My hand trembled as I gripped the flashlight. Every instinct told me to turn back. I should run home to the safety of my cottage. I should return to the warmth of my fire, the comfort of my books. But I couldn't. I'd come too far. I'd waited too long. I had to know. I pushed the door open. The hinges screeched in protest. I stepped inside. The air was thick with dust. The smell of mildew and salt clung to everything. My flashlight cast long shadows on the stone walls. It revealed cracks and patches of moss that had taken root. The floor was littered with debris. There was broken glass, pieces of wood, a rusted oil can. The can rolled away when my foot brushed against it. I shivered. The cold seeped through my coat. I started up the spiral staircase to the top of the tower. The stairs were narrow. The wood was warped and splintered. Each step groaned under my weight. I held onto the rusted iron railing. Its surface was rough against my palm. I climbed slowly. My heart pounded in my chest. The higher I went, the stronger the wind became. It whistled through the cracks in the walls. It was a haunting melody, echoing my unease. I counted the steps as I went, 10, 20, 30. Finally, I reached the lantern room at the top. The room was circular. Its walls were lined with cracked glass windows. They looked out over the endless sea. The old lamp sat in the center. Its glass was fogged with age. Its metal was rusted, cold to the touch. The floor was wooden, worn smooth by years of use. A thin layer of dust swirled around my feet as I moved. I set my thermos and notebook on the floor. My flashlight cast a pale circle of light around me. I sat on a small stool I found in the corner. The stool wobbled under my weight. Its legs were uneven, but it held. I opened my notebook. I intended to write about the history of the place. I wanted to document its decay, its mystery, for the children at the library. I'd brought a book on Vermont lighthouses with me. It was a thin volume from the library's archives. I flipped through its pages, looking for mentions of Blackthorn Point. The book was old. Its pages were yellowed, brittle. The ink was faded in places. I found a passage about the lighthouse, written in a spidery hand. Blackthorn Point Lighthouse, established 1875, abandoned 1953. Last keeper, William Harrow, left under mysterious circumstances. Rumors of a haunting persist. I scribbled the words in my notebook. My pen scratched against the paper. The sound was loud in the silence of the room. I wrote about the cracked windows, the rusted lamp. I noted how the wind seemed to whisper through the walls. I wrote about the stories I'd heard, the woman in white, the whispers on the wind. I told myself I was here for research. I was just collecting facts. There was nothing to fear, but then I heard it. A whisper. It was soft, almost imperceptible, like the rustle of silk. "Eleanor," it whispered, so soft, so chilling. My name carried on a breath of wind. A faint whisper echoes, "Eleanor." I froze. My pen hovered over the page. My heart slammed against my ribs. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on me. The temperature dropped. My breath was visible in the dim light of my flashlight. I turned my head slowly. My neck was stiff with fear. But there was nothing behind. Me. Just the empty room, the cracked windows, the rusted lamp. I tried to laugh it off. I told myself I was imagining things. Old lighthouses were full of strange noises. I'd read about it in my books. The wind could mimic voices. The mind could conjure phantoms in the dark. But then I heard it again. It was clearer this time, closer. Eleanor. The whisper grows closer. Eleanor. The voice was feminine, soft, plaintive. It seemed to come from the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest. I stood up. My stool scraped against the floor. I swung my flashlight around. Its beam trembled in my hand. The light caught something, a flicker of movement, a shimmer of white in the darkness. I took a step closer. My breath hitched in my throat, and then I saw her. A woman. She was young, maybe 20. She stood in the corner of the lantern room. She had long, dark hair that fell in waves over her shoulders. She wore a white dress. Its fabric was tattered at the hem. It was stained with something dark, something that looked like blood. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her eyes were hollow, twin pools of shadow. They seemed to look right through me. She was beautiful, in a haunting, ethereal way, but there was something wrong about her. Something that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot. My flashlight shook in my hand. Its beam flickered, as if the battery were dying. The woman took a step closer. Her bare feet were silent on the wooden floor. I saw the bloodstain on her dress more clearly now. It was a dark, wet patch. It spread across her chest, glistening in the light. A heartbeat pounds loudly. She raised a hand. Her fingers were long, pale. She pointed at me. "Help me," she whispered, her voice so desperate, so broken. It echoed in my mind, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. A faint whisper echoes, "Help me." Before I could respond, she vanished. The air shimmered where she'd stood. A faint scent of lavender and salt water lingered. I stumbled back. My foot caught on the stool. I nearly fell. My flashlight clattered. To the floor. The beam rolled across the room. It illuminated a small white feather where the woman had been. I knelt down. My hands trembled. I picked it up. It was soft, delicate. It might have come from a gull or a dove. But it felt heavy in my hand, as if it carried the weight of 100 years. My heart pounded. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Who was she? What did she want? Why had she called my name? I stuffed the feather into my pocket. I grabbed my things. I fled down the stairs. My footsteps echoed in the empty tower. Hurried footsteps echo. The wind howled outside. It was a mournful wail that seemed to chase me. The brambles caught at my coat as I stumbled along the path. I didn't stop until I reached my cottage. I slammed the door behind me. I locked it with shaking hands. I sank into my armchair by the fire. My thermos was still clutched in my hand. The tea inside had long gone cold. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined it. The woman in white was a trick of the light. She was a product of my overactive imagination. But the feather in my pocket was real. Its softness was a stark contrast to the terror I'd felt. I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I needed answers. There was only one person I could turn to, Samuel, the old lighthouse keeper. He'd been my friend since childhood. Samuel was 60, a gruff man with a weathered face. His eyes held the weight of too many secrets. He lived in a small cabin near the docks. It was a ramshackle place, surrounded by fishing nets and rusted anchors. Old photographs of the sea hung on the walls. I'd known him since I was a girl. He'd worked as the keeper of Blackthorn Point, back before the lighthouse was abandoned. He'd always been kind to me. He'd bring me seashells, teach me how to tie sailor's knots. But there was a darkness in him. It was a heaviness I'd never understood. I waited until the next morning to visit him. The dawn broke over Greyhaven in a wash of pale gold and pink. I walked to his cabin. The feather was still in my pocket. Its presence was a constant reminder of the night before. Samuel was sitting on his porch when I arrived. He held a mug of coffee. His gaze was fixed on the horizon. He looked up as I approached. His eyes narrowed as he saw the expression on my face. "What's wrong, Eleanor?" he asked. His voice was rough but gentle. I sat down beside him. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap. I told him everything. I told him what I'd seen in the lantern room. I described the woman in white, the whisper that had called my name. I showed him the feather. Its white surface caught the morning light. I watched as his face darkened. His hands tightened around his mug. "You shouldn't have gone up there," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "That place is no good. It's been no good since the night Abigail died." Distant waves crashed softly. Abigail. The name sent a shiver down my spine. It was a name I'd heard in whispers, in the stories my mother used to tell. I leaned forward. My heart raced. I asked him to tell me more. Samuel hesitated. His jaw was tight. But after a long moment, he sighed. He began to speak. He told me about Abigail Harrow, the lighthouse keeper's daughter. She'd lived at Blackthorn Point in the 1890s. She was a beautiful girl with long, dark hair. Her smile could light up the darkest night. She'd been in love with a sailor named James. He'd promised to marry her, to take her away from Greyhaven. But her father, William Harrow, didn't approve. William was a hard man, a widower. He'd raised Abigail alone after her mother died in childbirth. He was fiercely protective, some said possessive. He forbade Abigail from seeing James. One stormy night in 1892, William locked Abigail in the lantern room. He wanted to keep her from running away with her lover. The storm raged for days. The wind howled. The waves crashed against the cliffs. They shook the very foundations of the lighthouse. When the storm finally cleared, Abigail was gone. Some said she'd thrown herself into the sea. They thought she couldn't bear a life without James. Others whispered darker things. They said William, in a fit of rage, had pushed her from the lantern room. Her body was swallowed by the waves. Her body was never found, but her spirit, they said, never left. Since that night, people claimed to see her in the lantern room. Her white dress was stained with salt water. Her whispers haunted the cliffs. Samuel's voice grew quieter as he spoke. His eyes were distant, as if seeing the past unfold before him. "I saw her once," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "When I was keeper back in the 40s, I was up in the lantern room checking the lamp. I heard her. She called my name, just like she called yours. I turned. There she was, standing in the corner. Her dress dripped with water. Her eyes were so sad, I thought my heart would break. I ran, Eleanor. I ran, and I never went back." A distant wind howls softly. I sat there, stunned. The feather burned a hole in my pocket. I wanted to ask more, to press him for details, but the look on his face stopped me. There was fear there, yes, but also guilt. A deep, gnawing guilt. I didn't understand. I thanked him for telling me. I promised I'd be careful. I left him on his porch. His gaze was once again fixed on the sea. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside my cottage. I kept replaying the events of the previous night. The whisper, the woman in white, the bloodstain on her dress. I thought about Abigail, her love for James, her father's rage. I thought about Samuel, the guilt in his eyes, the way he'd looked when he spoke of her. And then I heard it again. It was faint but clear. It came from the direction of the lighthouse. "Help me, Eleanor." A haunting whisper echoes, "Help me." The voice was unmistakable. It was the same plaintive whisper I'd heard in the lantern room. I sat up. My heart pounded. I looked out my window. The lighthouse stood in the distance. Its silhouette was stark against the moonlit sky. Its lantern room glinted like a beacon. I knew I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the feather. Its softness was a stark contrast to the terror I felt. As I held it, I noticed something. There was a tiny scrap of paper tucked into its quill. It was so small I'd missed it in the dim light of the lantern room. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. My breath caught as I read the words. They were written in a shaky, faded hand. "He lied to me." A heartbeat pounds loudly. I stared at the note. My mind raced. Who had lied to Abigail? Her father? James? Someone else entirely? I knew I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape. It was something that would change me forever. I knew I had to go back to the lighthouse. I had to face the whispers, the woman in white. I had to uncover the truth about Abigail Harrow. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. It was a beginning that would lead me deeper into the shadows of Blackthorn Point. The past and the present would collide in ways I could never have imagined.